onions, garlic chives, leeks, and shallots. Welcome to episode 48 of the Growing Space podcast. In today's episode, we are picking back up with our Meet the Plant Families mini-series, and we're going to talk about the most common edible members of the Amaryllidaceae plant family, and even more specifically, the edible members that make up the genus Allium. Yeah. So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about all of those delicious ingredients that form the base of so many meals. I mean, what meal doesn't start with onions and garlic? And these are some of my favorite things to grow at home. Also in this plant family are also something that we'll be talking about today are bunching onions or scallions. Just like these plant family episodes have been going, I'm going to share with you the different characteristics of these plants, what makes them, what unifies them as members of the same family and the same genus. Super helpful to have this background information about the different things that we grow at home so that we can just better understand them and be better stewards of our growing spaces. We'll talk about the things you need to know about growing them, what their soil preference is, maybe some specific nutrients that they need to grow and thrive, how to harvest them, how to water them, what to do after you harvest them. So the different crops that we're talking about today, they have some unique post-harvest care that you can practice if you'd like, or you can eat them fresh. It's up to you. And we'll talk through maybe some common pests. We'll talk about why members of this plant family are great to grow in the fall and why they are fantastic companion plants. So let's go ahead and get started talking about the Amaryllidaceae plant family and the genus Allium.
Welcome to the Growing Space podcast. I'm your host, Farmer Erin, owner of the Patio Farmer, and I believe that no matter what size space you have, you can grow food at home. Tune in every Tuesday as I share my best tips, tricks, and encouragement for tending to homegrown edible plants. I'm here to support your food growing journey. The Growing Space podcast is sponsored by Plant Club by the Patio Farmer. Plant Club by the Patio Farmer is a monthly subscription service I started in 2020. It's a membership-based opportunity to take your growing journey to the next level. With 4 different membership options, you get to decide the amount and kind of support that's right for you. All Plant Club members receive access to my online community through a platform called Circle. Having access to this platform allows members to share pictures, ask questions, celebrate harvests, and get to know each other. All Plant Club members also have access to free seeds each month, along with information on how to plant and tend to their crops, with seeding instructions and downloadable resources from the Patio Farmer's Resource Library. Membership starts at just $14 a month. Join Plant Club today by visiting my website, thepatiofarmer.com/membership.
The Allium genus of the Amaryllidaceae plant family is known to produce bulbs. Shocking. I know. Now, these bulbs, also shocking, tend to have layers. These bulbs are actually considered to be like underground stems. So it's actually the continuation of the stem or the stalk of the plant that we see above that forms the bulb within the soil. And bulbs, rhizomes, root systems are little storage units, right? Storage units for storing energy and sugars and starches that the plant will need throughout its life as it's producing. So that is a key defining factor of the Allium genus, or these different species within the Allium genus. Also, the flowers we can look to as helpful characteristics that unify these different plants. If you've seen green onions produce these flowers, they're gorgeous, or like chives for sure are probably more common, but they produce these spherical clusters of individual little flowers. Sometimes they're bright white flowers, sometimes they're like a soft purpley pinky color, but they produce these teeny tiny little fruit, and then they open up and they produce dark black seeds inside these little fruits that are found in these spherical flower clusters at the tops of the plants. So there you go. And, as I've mentioned throughout this mini series, this plant family mini series, I just find it's helpful to understand these characteristics so that we can better understand all of the members of these plant families that we might be growing at home. Another characteristic that these plants all share and that unifies them is that they make fantastic companion plants. So kind of the purpose of picking up with this plant families mini series is twofold, really. First is to help get you ready for fall. So these plants are great fall growers. They love growing when it's a little cooler out. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second as we talk about planning for these plants and knowing how to sow them and grow them in our growing spaces. But they are also a fantastic companion plant. 2 weeks ago, I shared an episode that introduced the idea of companion planting, the different motivations that you might have for companion planting, or the goals that you're looking to achieve by companion planting. And so if that is something that interests you, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that episode. It's episode 46, and I'll be sure to put a note about that in the show notes. So read your show notes. There's lots of good stuff tucked in there for you. And then last week's episode, so episode 47, was the first kind of pickup episode of the Meet the Plant Families miniseries for fall. And in that episode, I shared the Lamiaceae plant family, or the mint family, which contains a ton of our edible culinary herbs. All of our Mediterranean herbs are in that plant family. And I shared that the reason why they make fantastic companion plants is because of their strong scent and the oils, the compounds that are found in those plants. And for the alliums, it's the same reason. So the alliums, they produce this really pungent, strong scent, right? That's why we love them, just like the Lamiaceae plant family. We love these plants because of that flavor profile. But there are a lot of animals that do not appreciate that scent the way that we do, or that flavor profile the way that we do. And so members of the allium family can be super helpful in helping to repel or keep unwanted visitors away from our plants. So much so, and I mentioned this in last week's episode as well, but I'll mention it again here because I like to speak from personal experience, personal growing experience. I have a ton of wooded area in and around my growing space, and we have tons of wildlife. We've got bunnies and squirrels and chipmunks and tons of birds. And I mix in a lot of companion plants. So my herbs, my alliums in and around other edible plants that I'm growing as a deterrent in keeping those little critters that I strive for coexistence with out of my vegetables. And one of my favorite things to do that uses members of the allium plant family is to sow them or plant them in the borders or along the borders and edges of my raised bed. I almost create like a little allium fence, if you will, to help protect my plants against visitors. And it works. It's so great. So I would highly encourage you, if you have pests, if you have little critters that you're trying to keep out of your growing space, maybe you consider picking up a packet of green onion. Those are the easiest. Pick up a packet of green onion seed and just plant yourself a little border, a little edge of green onion this fall and see if that makes a difference for you. I bet it will. Keep me posted. I want to know. Okay, so when it comes down to planting and planning for growing alliums, growing members of this plant family, a couple of things to keep in mind. First is, these plants, they do need a decent amount of sun. So you want to pick a spot that gets at least 6 hours of sun. More is better, but if you get 6 hours, they'll be nice and happy. You can plant members of this plant family directly in the ground if you'd like. You can grow them in containers. You can grow them in raised beds. They are pretty flexible in terms of where you pop them in the soil. They do not take up a lot of space, so these plants are fairly compact and usually only need like 4 to 6 inches per plant or per cluster of plants. One thing to keep in mind about growing chives and garlic chives is that those plants like to kind of divide and split. Those plants get more voluminous and produce more of those delicious stems and stalks the longer they grow. So just keep that in mind. They're super easy to thin and divide, and if you feel like they might be taking over a space, you can easily pull them out. They are also perennial plants. So as we learned in last week's episode, a perennial plant is one that keeps on growing in our space. Chives and garlic chives will die back in the wintertime, so you won't necessarily see them year-round, but they will die back, and then in the spring they'll reemerge. The same plant in the same spot will reemerge and grow for you, kind of in perpetuity, which is a beautiful thing. But on the whole, these plants do not need a lot of space to grow, maybe 4 to 6 inches per plant. One thing to know before you grow any alliums is that they like well-draining soil that is light and loose and fluffy, and they also like having a little phosphorus mixed into the soil. Now, keeping in mind that the main part of the plant that we're after in most of these cases is going to be that bulb, right? That root system, that rhizome that's growing underneath the ground. And if you remember from a couple episodes ago, I know I've mentioned this in at least one, maybe 2 episodes of the Growing Space podcast, but there is a plant macronutrient called phosphorus. We need phosphorus too in our bodies, and our plants really need phosphorus in their little beings. And the role that phosphorus plays for our plants is, 1, it helps the plant produce seed, which is important anytime we're eating the fruit or the seed of the plant. And 2, it helps the plant develop strong root systems. Yep. So anytime we are cultivating the root of a plant, we need to help these plants along a little bit and introduce a little extra phosphorus into the soil before we plant. Now, I'll be sure to link some examples of my favorite sources for phosphorus in today's show notes. My favorite sources of phosphorus are rock phosphate. That's my top pick. If I can choose, it would be rock phosphate because this is a mineral form of phosphorus. So it is not animal derived. The other form of phosphorus that you could use is bone meal, and bone meal is usually easier to get your hands on at a garden center or hardware store, but it's exactly what it sounds like. It's crushed up bone, usually from some kind of processing site, which is, in the grand scheme of things, I'm glad they're using the whole animal. But I have dogs. I don't know. I bet some of you who are listening to this podcast have dogs or cats that might live outside or just hang out outside sometimes, join you in the backyard for some adventures. And they love bone meal. They love any animal-derived product because they're dogs and cats. And so as a dog mom, I have found that it is best for all involved that if I can use a mineral-based product or at least a vegan product. You can also look for vegan products that will tell you that there's no animal nutrients or animal-derived products in those. But that is my go-to just for that very reason. So find a nice source of phosphorus that you feel comfortable using. And a little pro tip for you, when you are reading a package of plant food or a soil amendment in the store and you're trying to decide if it has a lot of phosphorus in it, then I want you to look for a set of numbers. And usually this is pretty easy to find right on the front of the packaging. But you want to look for 3 numbers that are divided by hyphens. So it'll have a number, a hyphen, a number, a hyphen, and then another number. And that tells you the macronutrients, the soil macronutrients that are in that bag of plant food, that bag of soil amendment. And they are always listed in the same order, and that represents the macronutrient content. So the first number is always going to speak to the nitrogen content of that plant food. The second number is always going to be the phosphorus content, and then the third number is going to be potassium. So when you're looking for a soil amendment or a plant food that is high in phosphorus, you want a high second number. That plant food, of the 3 numbers, the phosphorus number, that second number, should be the highest. So to give you an idea for rock phosphate and for bone meal, I think the macronutrient numbers on those are usually like 0, 20, 0. Just to give you an idea. So it's like literally just phosphorus in there. And that's what you want. Now, you don't need to use a ton of the soil amendment to introduce that nutrient content to your plants. I would say using a cup of either rock phosphate or bone meal for every 4 square feet would be sufficient. You just kind of sprinkle it on the top of your soil, you mix it in lightly, and then as the plants are growing, as they need the phosphorus, it's available to them and they can take it up through their roots. Now, for feeding your alliums throughout the season, and to kind of back up a little bit, these crops do usually take a while to get established and produce a harvest. I think the fastest growing alliums to harvest are going to be your leeks and your green onions, then your chives, then your onions, and finally your garlic. These plants take a long time. And when I say a long time, I mean at least 60 days for your green onion. Leeks might be closer to 90 days. Chives, if you're starting those from seed, probably somewhere between 60 and 90 days to a first harvest. Onions can take over 100 days. Garlic takes about 9 months, just like a baby, to grow and produce a harvest for you. So because these plants take a long time, they're going to be in the soil for a decent amount of time. It's a really good practice to get into the habit of feeding them every 4 to 8 weeks throughout the growing season. And you can use an all-purpose plant food. You can use a little bit of that rock phosphate if you really want to give their roots a bolster. But getting into the habit of feeding them is just something super supportive that you can do for these kind of marathon growers, if you will. And, as I mentioned, they take a long time to mature. So how do you know when they're ready? How do you know when it's time to harvest your onions and your chives and your leeks and your green onions and your garlic and all the things, right? So with chives, leeks, and green onion, these 3 are fairly easy to know when it's time to harvest because you can easily look at the plant and see the part of the plant that you are planning to consume, right? So you can look at your chives and you can think to yourself, oh, I have enough chives here to harvest. Or, you could look at your leek and be like, oh, yeah, this is what I would expect a leek, the size of a leek to be when I harvest it or when I use it for a meal. Same with your green onion. And so it's easier to understand when these 3 crops are ready to harvest. So when they're of the right size, when they meet your expectations, that's when you can go ahead and harvest them. Again, it usually takes somewhere between 60 and 90 days to get to a harvest for these crops. Your leeks, you pull the entire leek up out of the ground, right? Because you're eating the root. And there's, certain processing that you need to do for leeks because of how they grow and how they grow new leaves or new, essentially like bulb leaves in the soil. They can hold a lot of grit and sand in between those leaves, which is why you hear of people soaking their leeks, like cutting them open and soaking them in some cold water before they use them and cook with them, so you don't get any of that kind of like gritty sediment. So keep that in mind for preparing your leeks. Chives and green onion, you can cut the tops, you can cut the green tops off of these plants and they'll regrow if you want them to. Typically, that's the preference for chives, right? You want to cut some of the plant and then wait for it to regrow and then cut some more. Green onions, you can totally do that too, or you can harvest a whole plant if you also like to use the white part of the green onion in your meals. Now, when it comes to onions and shallots and garlic, these are a little more challenging to know when it's time to harvest because the part of the plant that we're cultivating, the part of the plant that we want to eat, is below the soil. We can't see it. So with onions and shallots, the very best way to know if these are ready to harvest is to wait until those green leaves that you can see, right, begin to flop over. And they'll flop over, they'll be on their side. Sometimes you can see the little onion, like the bulb of the onion pushing up. You can sometimes see its little shoulders sticking up out of the soil. So if those two things have happened, if you can see the shoulders and the stem has fallen over, then you can know that it's time to harvest your onions and shallots. And you just very gently kind of pull them out of the soil, wiggle them to release them from their home, from the soil. Now with garlic is a little different. And let's just go ahead and jump in and talk about garlic, the magic of growing garlic. Spoiler, if you're really into growing garlic or you really want to try growing garlic this year, you should totally join Plant Club this fall because in November, we are growing garlic. And I'm going to share so much more information with Plant Club members then. So this is just kind of a sneak peek, a little preview into growing garlic. Okay? But I want you to know because it's important to know this as you're planning for fall. Garlic, as I have already mentioned, it takes about 9 months to grow. And we plant garlic at a really odd time. Garlic is very special. Not only is it one of the longest growing non-perennial crops that we can grow in our space, but it is also the crop that is planted last in the year, in the growing season, generally speaking. So garlic likes to be planted from seed at the end of October or like the beginning of November, depending on where you are. As you know, if you've listened to this podcast in the past, I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is the USDA Hardiness Zone 8A. If you want to know what hardiness zone you live in, then be sure to check the show notes and I have a link for you to be able to find that out for yourself. But here in zone 8A, if we plant garlic at the end of October, that is perfect timing. That's perfect timing for garlic. And I like to think of it as you're planting garlic to help keep those vampires away at Halloween. You plant seed garlic anytime you can get your hands on seed garlic. I think you will be more successful than if you tried using store-bought garlic. Although if you like a little experiment, you can certainly try that. But to be most successful, you would want to use a seed garlic. And you plant a clove. So you separate the bulb out and you get all the little cloves separated and you plant a clove in the ground. And that clove will grow all through the winter, all through the spring. And, if you're doing the math here with me, you'll be harvesting the garlic in early June. late May, early June, sometime around there is when you'll be harvesting the garlic. Now, there are two main kinds of garlic plants that you can choose to grow. One is a hardneck variety, and then another is a softneck variety. The main difference here is that a hardneck variety is going to grow a kind of thick, super round, smooth, flowering stalk in the middle of the plant. And usually this flowering stalk starts showing up around May, early May, mid-May. And this is what forms the hard neck. So when you go to open up the garlic bulb, there's that woody stem right in the middle of the plant. And this woody stem will grow and it will produce garlic scapes, which is essentially the flowering head, the flowering bulb, bud, if you will, of the garlic plant. If you were to leave that scape on the plant, then it would produce a flower, which is super fun, and you can eat the flowers and they're delicious. But if you allow your plant to produce a flower, then it's pulling up energy out of the roots, aka shrinking the roots, which is what you're after, right? It's pulling up that energy down from the bulb, the root of your plant, and into the flower so it can bloom. So a little trick is you can cut those garlic scapes, cut them right off, and you can eat them. They're delicious. They're absolutely delicious. And that sends the energy back down to the bulb to grow a thicker, bigger bulb for you. And then usually about 2 to 3 weeks after you harvest your garlic scapes, you can harvest your bulb garlic. So I say all of that to say that's how you know garlic is ready to harvest. So there's something super magical and super special that happens when we grow garlic and when we grow onions at home for ourselves. And that is we are afforded the opportunity to eat these very common plants that we're very familiar with using and cooking with, right? We're able to eat them in a form that's not super readily available. And that is we get to eat them fresh. So just a little like insider scoop into the food system and the grocery store in particular. So the garlic that you are purchasing from the grocery store and onions, the dried bag of onions that you are purchasing are not fresh. They have been cured for at least a month, probably longer, probably a lot longer. I would guess that any of the garlic and any of the onions, really any of the potatoes, the storage crops that are unrefrigerated, I would guess that those have probably been harvested anywhere from 3 to 6 months, maybe longer, before you get your hands on them. Isn't that crazy? They have all gone through a curing process, which is where you allow the outer skin of these different vegetables, these different crops, to dry out, maybe get a little flaky in the case of onions and garlic. Usually it's a couple layers, right? Like 2 to 3 layers of skin to dry out and form this protective barrier, this protective outer barrier, and that helps the plant or that helps the bulb remain shelf stable for longer. And then they're able to be shipped out and shared in stores and purchased by you and then eaten by you in your home. But when you have the opportunity to grow these yourself, you get the rare chance to eat garlic in its green form, to eat a fresh onion that hasn't been cured. And in doing so, you're not only getting a ton more nutrients and reducing your food miles, but you're able to experience new textures, new flavor profiles. It's really exciting. So I'll just mention that first about harvesting, or I'll just mention that before we get into curing, which is totally an option for you as well. Like if you love homegrown garlic, like I do, oh my gosh, I love like it's a totally different garlic than what you buy in the store. It's fresher, obviously. It's more pungent and flavorful, and I am obsessed. So I always grow tons of garlic Every year, I dedicate an entire raised bed to garlic. That's how much I love it. And then I cure it. And again, basically the curing process is drying out those outer leaves, those outer protective edges of your plant. And the way that you do this, so you take your harvested garlic stalks, and I keep them whole. I know some people will trim the stems, but I leave the stems on, and I'll rinse them clean. I'll take the hose, and this is a great thing to do outside, and I'll spray down the plants really good. I'll get all of the soil off of the plants, and then I will let them air dry. You can do this outside. You can let them air dry a little bit outside in the sun if you have a nice sunny spot. And then I will move them to somewhere inside. Like my laundry room is perfect for this, but like your garage or your shed could also be a great spot for curing. You want somewhere that gets a decent amount of airflow, so not somewhere that stays super stagnant or somewhere that gets super hot. Like you want airflow and you want a fairly regulated temperature wherever you're curing. That would be the ideal. And I usually get I just have an old cookie sheet or two at this point that I use for curing. And I place them first as a single layer. And then I I'll put one row of bulbs and stems on one of the short edges of the cookie sheet. And then I'll do another one, but I'll do another row on top of that, but I won't put the bulbs over top of each other. I'll put the next row of bulbs like an inch away from the first one. I kind of do that in layers, and I take up the entire cookie sheet. And doing this, you're really increasing the airflow around all of the bulbs, which is so important when you're curing. And then I just leave them. The first couple of days, it's going to smell really, really garlicky wherever you have them, which is a beautiful thing. And then usually after about a week, that smell kind of goes down, it dissipates. And I will leave them there for 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes a little longer, but you want those outer edges to be totally papery dry. And then once they're dry, then you can cut the stems. And I usually leave maybe an inch of stem on top of the bulb, and then you can store them. It's super easy. You can store them and you can use them throughout the year until it's time to plant for garlic again. I'm obsessed. I love garlic. I put it in everything. And it's so good for you. It's good for your heart. Garlic is great for your heart. And then you can do the same with your onions, with your shallots. You can cure them the exact same way if you're planning to grow a lot and then store them for future use. All right. And one more thing to cover about alliums is pests. Now, in last week's episode, in the Lamiaceae plant family episode, there was just one main pest to call out, and that's the case for today as well. So these plants are super easygoing. They are not super prone to pests, which is why they make great companion plants. And the most common pest that I see on alliums is the black allium aphid. Yep, it is specific to these plants, and it's an aphid, which is a super common pest, also super easy to treat, and it's black. So if you see clusters of black bugs on your alliums, it's most likely an allium aphid issue. And you can either get in there and squish those bugs yourself with your fingers, or you can use a neem oil application or an insecticidal soap application, or even just Dawn dish detergent. So this would be the same concoction that I mentioned in last week's episode for the Lamiaceae plant family, but it's just a teaspoon of neem oil concentrate or insecticidal soap or Dawn dish detergent with 16 ounces of water in a fresh spray bottle, fresh clean spray bottle. And you want to spray those aphids in the morning or in the evening, and you want to avoid any other bugs that you see that you don't want to die, like your bees and your butterflies and etc. Okay, so in next week's episode, we have another plant family that we're going to meet. This is also a subcategory within a plant family. So we are going to be learning all about the Chenopodiaceae plant family, which is a subfamily of the overarching plant family Amaryllidaceae, or the amaranth plant family. And a nickname for the Chenopodiaceae plant family is the goosefoot plants. So I'll just let you noodle on that. They are some of my favorite plants. I mean, I feel like I say that every week, but I love growing members of this plant family in the fall. This year, I am super excited to grow one of them. It's given me some trouble these last couple of years, and every year I get a craving for it, and this is my year. This is my time. But I'll be sure to clue you in on all of the members of the Chenopodiaceae plant family in next week's episode. And then if you have listened to this podcast in the past, then you know that I like to share a little tidbit, a little morsel of information to sign off on each week. And this week, it's August when this episode is being shared, and our summer vegetables are hanging in there. They're still producing and thriving, and we're getting ready for the fall season. And I just want to share a quick little pest scouting tip for you. And this is going to be the small pests, the little buggies that like to crawl up on our plants and eat our plants. And they crawl up from the soil, right? That's where they usually come from. Sometimes they come from above, which is fine. But the ones that come up from the soil, where do you think you would find them first on your plants? Maybe on your lowest leaves, closest to the soil, and maybe on the underside of your leaves versus on top of your leaves. So a fun little fact, fun little helpful tidbit for you is to check underneath those bottom leaves every so often. Maybe once or twice a week, maybe as you're watering, just take a quick little peek underneath the leaves, see what's going on, see if you notice a little bug. You might find that you can stay on top of pest issues a lot better just with that quick pest scouting tip. So there you go. That's your fun little fact, your fun little tidbit from me. And I will see you back here next week to talk all about the Chenopodiaceae plants. What could they be? We'll have to see.
Thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Growing Space Podcast. I hope that you learned something new and that you were able to take this new information home with you and implement into your growing journey and into your growing space. As always, I am here to support you and your food growing journey. If you'd like to learn more about the different services and resources and membership programs that I run through the Patio Farmer, please check out my website, thepatiofarmer.com. You can also follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and oh my gosh, most recently, TikTok. Wow. I know. Here I am. Patio Farmer is on TikTok. It's very exciting. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give it a like or a rating or a review if you want. Maybe share a little comment about your favorite part of the episode. Share it with a friend. The more interactions I get with my little podcast online, the more I'm able to help people just like you in their food growing journeys. As always, thanks for being here, and I will see you again next week.